Hello and welcome back to Season 2 of Fertility Talks, the Therapie Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Ranae von Meding, and I'm so excited to be back hosting the second season of this podcast. Each week, I'll be sitting down with a different guest and chatting all things fertility. As always, it is our hope that through this series, through honest conversation and information, we can strip away some of the stigma that sometimes comes hand in hand with infertility and fertility treatment in Ireland. This week, I'm joined by a very special guest who many of you will know. She's an author, model, nutritional therapist, previous winner of Miss World, and now the most important title of all, mum, to her 3 beautiful children. She has an incredible story of hope after trauma and loss. I'm so delighted she's here with us today, so please welcome to the podcast, Rosanna Davison. So Rosanna, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Ranae. Thank you so much. It's it's wonderful always to speak about our surrogacy and fertility journey, and then how our story unfolded. And if our story and telling it can even help one other couple, then I'm pleased to tell it. I'm delighted to be a guest.
And I think how visible you've been over the last number of years has 100% helped so many people. So thank you so much for being so open and honest about the highs and the lows of what you've gone through. I think most people watching this and listening to this will know who you are, but for anyone who doesn't, maybe you could just tell me a little bit about yourself, and maybe what your background is, where you grew up, and what sort of family you come from, and what sort of childhood you had.
Well, to start off, the most important job I have is that I'm a mum of 3 children. I have 3 under 3, so Sophia is 2. And as I'll chat about, she was born via surrogacy in the Ukraine. And then we have our identical twin boys, Hugo and Oscar, who are 16 months old, flying around the place, full of beans as well. So it's a busy household, but great fun. I suppose I've been very lucky over the past 20 years. I have had a career in sort of the modelling and media industry. I won Miss World back in 2003, which is crazy.
That seems so long ago. Oh my
gosh. I know, it's nearly 20 years, when I was 19 years old in China. And, I've enjoyed, a really interesting and varied creative career with lots of travel. I've also trained in nutrition. So I started off by going to UCD. So I was actually in first year in University College Dublin when I won Miss World. I was studying sociology and history of art. I deferred that for a year and then went back, finished the degree. And then later on in my mid-20s, I decided to go back to college and train as a nutritional therapist. So that was a 3-year course with, clinical placement, did that. And then just in 2018 to 2019, I completed a master's in MSc in personalized nutrition. So it's always, I suppose, health, nutrition, particularly the sports science side, has always been an interest and a passion. And I said to my husband when I finish the masters, I promise I won't do any more. It's intense, and this is before kids as well. It's intense studying, and your partner has to really put up with a lot of late nights and early mornings, and it was a full-time sort of 40 hours a week course, so it was intense. And now I'm talking about maybe going back in a few years and there's a course I'm looking at in clinical nutrition and dietetics, and he's just going, oh.
No more. It's funny though, I find
you do get addicted.
Yeah, you do, absolutely. My oldest brother is the same. It's it's the eternal student of, but it's that love of learning and new things and meeting new people and developing your skills that you already have, I think.
It is. And I think when you're sort of exhausted and kind of worn out from the whole process, and you've handed in your final dissertation or sat your final exam, you think, okay, I'm done. But, that urge to learn and the curiosity comes back. And I'm particularly interested in sort of science and health sciences. And, it's an ever evolving area. There's always new research coming out, disproving old theories. And, I find that fascinating. So, and I suppose there's an element at the moment with young children. I've sort of arranged my life so I can be at home with them as much as possible. A lot of the work I do is just online. So I suppose you do put certain plans and career goals on hold with small children. And then maybe when they get to an age where they're in school and, you know, you have a bit more time, then you can start to plan for the next few years. But of course, as we all know, life can hit you with all sorts of curves as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, just to go back to your original question. I grew up in Dalkey in County Dublin. I have two brothers, Hubie and Michael, who Hubie is 4 years younger and Michael 6 years younger. But we've always been very close. They both live in London now. And I just had a very sort of happy, outdoorsy childhood. I think, and I say it all the time to my husband, I'm just so grateful to have grown up as probably the last generation without, you know, this constant access to smartphones and social media and the internet. You know, I still remember when we got dial-up internet at the house and having to, you know, sit there on the old computer and click and wait for ages, and that familiar, you know, dial-up tone.
Yeah.
Maybe you're too young to remember.
No. I remember. I think I'm 4 years younger than you as well. No, I remember having the dial-up. I think if you played that sound, there's just like a certain age group of people who know exactly what that is, and then there's slightly younger people who are just like, I have no idea what that sound is.
Well, I suppose it's in the same vein as, you know, cassette players or tapes. Actually, our children were given, I'm just going off course here, but our children were given a little teething toy, and it's just a little old-fashioned tape, and they pick it up and put it to their ear and go, hi, hi, hi. I mean, they think it's a phone, and, you know, they're never know what
they're like trying to swipe it.
yeah. And our 2-year-old knows how to swipe. She knows how to take
it's
videos now.
Scary, isn't it?
Like, I give her my phone locked and she takes videos like toddler cam, you know, going around.
Yeah.
So yeah, just what they soak up and what they kind of watch from what we're doing. So that's what I'm always grateful for, I suppose. And, you know, even at the start of my career, we communicated by fax. And I remember my boyfriend at the time setting up my Gmail for me in probably 2005, 2006. So, you know, I feel like a dinosaur saying all that.
I know, but like there was something more simple about life, you know?
It was simpler. And I sometimes think, I miss the 90s and the simplicity of it. And the, you know, just thinking back to my childhood, it was very much about being outdoors, about just playing. You know, we were lucky enough to have a nice garden to play in and parks nearby and the sea. So yeah, it was just about going out, playing games of football, badminton, all sorts of things in the summer. And that's really the kind of childhood that I hope to create for my children as well.
So in terms of wanting children, you know, obviously you are very close with your family. And did you always want kids? Was that, you know, as far back as you can remember, did you always picture yourself being a mummy?
Do you know what? I thought that one day I would, but it wasn't sort of at the forefront of my mind. I think in my 20s, I was very sort of focused on career goals and travel and, you know, having fun as you do in your early 20s. And then probably later on getting more of the sort of academic qualifications. But Wes and I met in 2006 when we were 22. And he's from a family of 4 siblings. He has 2 brothers a brother and 2 sisters. And I suppose we talked about kids at some point, and we knew we always wanted a family, but just not immediately. But it was really when we got married, when we were both 30, that we started thinking, well, maybe we'll give it a year just to enjoy married life and then start trying for a family. And at the time I was watching my friends, you know, have their first babies, and infertility and miscarriage was not on my radar. I knew that my mum had certain issues, but that was years back. She'd had an ectopic and she's been very open about that. I've written about it in my book as well. But apart from that, you know, it just seemed that you'd got pregnant and had a baby, and, you know, if you were young and healthy and fit, then there would be no problem. So that's what I assumed would happen. So in early 2016, I just actually published my first book, Eat Yourself Beautiful, at the end of 2015, finished sort of the press side of that, and thought, okay, I have a little bit of a breather now. we can maybe see if this baby thing might happen. And to our absolute amazement and delight, it actually happened very quickly, probably the first time. And I remember feeling kind of funny symptoms. We were on a walk quite early in 2016 with friends. I remember thinking, gosh, I'm very lightheaded. I feel very sort of faint. And, I would have been quite fit and worked out regularly. So after a few days, I was still feeling like that, and decided to take a pregnancy test. I was about 4.5 weeks, and it turned out I was pregnant. And we were just thrilled. Of course, I started looking at my due date in the autumn that year. A few days later, when I was about 5 weeks, maybe 5.5 weeks, I couldn't keep it in any longer. I told my family. Of course, I told my mom immediately, but we were just at a family gathering a week or so later, and just couldn't, keep it to myself.
Yeah.
And told my brothers, and everyone was delighted. And I remember my mum pulled me aside that day and just said, just be a little bit cautious. She'd, as I said, had her own fertility issues. She'd had another miscarriage actually after my youngest brother was born. So she'd unfortunately been through that. And, at the time I just thought it was mum being overly protective. And, I just said, thank you, but I'm sure it'll be okay. Sure, my friends get pregnant and have a baby. Isn't that normal? So it was all very exciting. I went to the doctor at about kind of nearly 6 weeks. She confirmed the pregnancy. I got booked in for my first scan at 8 weeks in Holles Street. And then it got to maybe just over 6 weeks, and I had a little bit of bleeding one evening. And I rang the doctor the next day, and she said, don't worry, a little bit of spotting can happen in early pregnancy with all that's happening inside of you. Just let me know if it continues. So it stopped for a day, and then it started again, and it was a little bit heavier. And I spoke to her again, and it was that night that it continued. It just got heavier and heavier and heavier. And then the cramps started. And as I found later on with pregnancies, and then with the twin pregnancy, you can have a bit of spotting, but unfortunately when the cramps start, it's never, in my experience, a positive sign. So I spent that night really just curled up in a ball in the bathroom, sobbing. Sorry, I've spoken about it so many times.
I know, but it doesn't.
The trauma stays with you forever, I think. But I got to the point. I mean, Wes was great, but it got to a point where I was just nothing would kind of resolve the pain. I had a hot water bottle. I was just on the bathroom floor, and I just said, you might as well go to bed, because I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. There's just a lot of blood. And luckily at that early stage, I mean, I was only 6.5 weeks, and there's no point in saying only, because I think once you see the pregnancy test positive, you're pregnant, and, all of your hopes and dreams start to sort of, evolve around you, and you start to imagine life as a parent. But it is a little bit easier in the sense that there isn't that much pregnancy tissue at 6.5 weeks. Yeah. So just a lot of blood. So I ended up later that night, I was on my own in the bathroom then at about 2 a.m, and I thought, who can I ring? I didn't want to ring my mom and tell her. I didn't want to wake her. And it just so turned out that my brother Michael was in LA. And I thought, maybe I'll just ring him. I need someone to talk to. And maybe it was the blood loss or what, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. I rang him, and, I said, Michael, I was pregnant. Well, I'm not anymore. And I just need someone to talk to. And he was just very sweet and supportive and kind. And, that helped. And I suppose that really started the process of me realizing that having someone to talk to when you're going through pregnancy loss or fertility struggles is of such crucial importance. As it turned out, we needed sort of close friends and family to lean on throughout that time. Even as a couple, you obviously need to support each other, and Wes very much supported me, but you kind of forget that it's the partner involved, obviously whether it's the man or a woman, they're experiencing a loss of hopes and dreams as well. And it was his lost baby too, and his lost pregnancy. So he needed the support too. So, my advice to anyone going through it would always be just to have someone to talk to. I know clinics now avail of counselling services, and to, if it's feasible for you to look into that. We didn't, and in retrospect, you know, I probably would have benefited from counselling services, although now obviously writing a book about it and talking about it in podcasts and interviews has been quite cathartic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so sorry, cut a long story short, I went actually into Holles Street the next day, and they scanned me. It was a complete miscarriage, and they just said to take a month to heal and to kind of, you know, it's a physical loss, not just in terms of the blood loss, but also the very sort of deep primal feeling you get when you're pregnant is suddenly taken away. All those hormones drain quite quickly out of your body, and you do feel like you've lost an important part of yourself as well as your future plans, and it's emotionally draining, of course, as well. And you know, I had to go back and tell my family as well. So we took a month, tried again a couple of months later. It worked again, but the same thing happened again, where it got to about 6.5 weeks and bleeding started, and you know, I had this sort of what they call a complete miscarriage, early miscarriage. And this happened again the third time. And after 3, as some people may or may not be aware, in Ireland, women are generally tested, and their partners, after 3 miscarriages. So I remember going back to the Marion Clinic in Holles Street and getting tests done. And they looked at all sorts of things, like obviously your hormone panel. They looked at blood coagulation and things like thyroid. We had Wes tested, so his semen analysis done, and that was fine. That was because it's obviously, as we know, much more so now, it's 50-50 when it comes to men and women in terms of fertility. Yeah. So I was, you know, I made sure that Wes was clear, and before I, you know, could kind of realize that was all down to me. We did karyotyping done, which looks at genetic compatibility, and all that really came out. I mean, I had an awful lot. I can't even count the amount of blood tests and scans and different things I had done over those few years, but all that really showed up was a condition called genetic condition called factor V Leiden, which is passed on from my mum's side. So it's heterozygous, which means it's only from one side of the family. And it just means my blood is around 20% more likely to clot, which meant that for pregnancies, I was advised to inject with heparin, which I did. So any, you know, future time I got pregnant, I would have to inject in the stomach with heparin, and then throughout, obviously, my pregnancy with the twins. And you just learn, anyone who's been through the IVF or surrogacy process, you just learn to self-inject, and it's never pleasant, but I suppose it just becomes part of your routine, your morning routine, because in terms of, you know, heparin anyway, you have to do it at the same time every day. So I did that. I was prescribed, you know, things like progesterone pessaries, which aren't particularly pleasant.
They're really not pleasant at all.
No.
I remember those on our first IVF, and no fond memories of the pessaries.
But they are more pleasant than what I was also prescribed later on, which was progesterone injections, which is quite a big needle, which goes right into the glute muscle and causes quite a bit of bruising.
Yeah, so, I had those as well. Those are more painful.
Yeah, they're not fun. Yeah. So things like that, baby aspirin, folic acid. I had all sorts of tests to see if I was genetically sort of able to metabolize folic acid properly, and I am. So, you know, as I said, the only thing that ever really showed up in that batch of tests anyway was the factor V, which was able to be treated with heparin. So went through that. So I'm trying to summarize these mad few years, but we continued in this vein anyway of getting pregnant very easily, but then losing them quite quickly at around the 6.5 week mark. I saw about 5 different specialists between Ireland and the UK, and some of them were helpful. Some of them just said, I remember one doctor just saying, you know, in my 25 years of fertility practice, I've never seen someone who gets pregnant so easily, but just can't maintain a pregnancy. And nobody could really sort of put their finger on what was happening. So I ended up doing an awful lot of my own research. At the time, I was doing a full-time master's degree. So I was in front of the computer anyway. I felt confident that I could research what I wanted to look at in terms of the academic papers. And I remember researching different areas. So looking at, the blood coagulation side, fine, that was ticked. Thyroid, that was fine, tick. And I was ticking off all the different things that I thought could be dysfunctional in my body. And of course you go through this whole sense of self-blame. And at the beginning, certainly of our journey, I was thinking maybe I shouldn't have had that cup of coffee, or why did I go to a Pilates class, or should I have gone for this walk? Maybe I dislodged my embryo and that's what caused it. So you do go through all these mixed emotions thinking that you're the one to blame. And again, if I can give any advice to any woman or couple out there, it's never to blame yourself. I mean, the absolute majority of pregnancy losses are down to a genetic anomaly in the embryo, or some sort of problem maybe with implantation, or it's never a good idea to start the self-blame process. And eventually I did sort of come out of that mindset, but it wasn't until mid 2017 where we'd been going through this every month or so, every cycle or so, should I say, I'd get pregnant, lose it. Maybe I'd wait a month, maybe I wouldn't. It got to, anyway, middle of that year. And one of the doctors I was seeing said to me or advised to go and get a hysteroscopy, which involved looking into the structural side of my uterus to see if there would be any structural issues. So I went to the Beacon Hospital. It was done under anaesthetic. And when I came around, the surgeon confirmed that they had cut out a septum, which is a piece of tissue which took up only about 10% of the inner lining of the fundus, the top bit of my uterus. But he said actually that can impact on implantation because it's a little bit more fibrous than the rest of the lining of your uterus. So if your fertilized egg is continuously trying to implant in this septum, then it's probably not getting the adequate blood supply and nutrients it needs to grow. So he said actually that's likely the issue. Yeah. So he said to wait a couple of months to heal and then to try again.
Sorry, could I just ask, how many miscarriages had you had at this point before you had the hysteroscopy?
I had 14 in total before the last one, before the boys. So maybe we were halfway through at this stage.
Wow.
6 or 7.
Wow. Okay.
But do you know what? Bizarrely, I count myself lucky that they were early ones, because you sort of just adapt in a very strange way to what you're going through. And I just took a very sort of pragmatic approach after the first couple and just thought, well, we're young enough. Obviously we're fertile enough in terms of our egg and sperm quality because we're getting pregnant. So there must be some other maybe medical issue that we can resolve. So it became more of just a quest to find the issue rather than getting too emotionally bogged down in what was happening. I think and as well, I never got to the stage, I should say, with scans that we were seeing a heartbeat. Yeah. The pregnancies always failed before it got to the stage of scans or heartbeats. So I never felt that we were losing obviously our hopes and dreams and our due date and all that kind of thing, but we weren't losing a physical beating heart, baby. Yeah. So that sort of comforted me in some way. But yeah, got pregnant quite quickly after the hysteroscopy, and I thought, this is it, this is going to work. The problem has been resolved. And of course, the same thing happened again at the 6.5 week mark. And I remember just hitting a very wobbly point then, a dark point mentally, and just thinking, well, we've tried everything at this stage. If this isn't the issue, then maybe it's not going to work out. Wes and I then began having conversations about how our life would look without children. And, that we'd travel and maybe set up businesses. We had, different passions in life, and I would set up, nutrition clinic and, do all these sorts of things. And we'd support each other and put ourselves through. But then I started thinking, but he really wants to be a dad. He was a fantastic uncle to his niece and nephew. And I thought, I'm blocking him from his dreams. I have to set him free. And I began thinking, I need to just tell him to leave me and find a new partner to have a family with. And I sort of stewed over this. I'm laughing now because we're knee deep in nappies, but I was very serious about it. And I sort of thought about it for a few weeks. And then I just said to him, Wes, I think that I'm not the woman to give you a family. And I think you need to think seriously about finding someone else. You're young enough, obviously it's not that easy to get a divorce on these grounds, but maybe we could just, I don't know. It's bizarre to look back on, but I was at that darker point where I just thought, this is what I have to do for him because I love him. But of course he sort of just smiled and said, Rosie, I married you, because I want a family with you. And if it doesn't happen, then we'll have a happy life and we'll find a way to enjoy our lives without a family. As lots of people do. I know, I'm well aware that kids aren't everyone's idea of happiness in life either. But for us, it just was, I suppose, because we came from that kind of family environment. So this is 2017 anyway, and it continued like this. I ended up going to a different reproductive immunology expert kind of later that year, and I got more tests on for immune system. And this was kind of the last area I looked at, I suppose, because I'd always read that the research wasn't concrete enough. Reproductive immunology in terms of research is quite a grey area. And, the tests are maybe, this is back now in 2017, things may have changed, but it's harder to pinpoint when you compare it to something like thyroid or, bloods, hormones. Yep. So I went to a man who I'd read was quite an expert in the field, and he sent me to get what's called Chicago bloods done. And it's expensive. I mean, it was over €1,000 to get this blood panel sent over to the States to be tested. But anyway, a few weeks later, he rang me to say that the tests showed that I had a significant imbalance in what are called Th1 and Th2 cytokines. And so he felt that my immune system was in a sort of constant fight or flight mode where it was sort of constantly, so I'm just trying to simplify it, but it was just constantly looking out for danger and ready to fight any intruders. And he felt that maybe my husband's DNA was viewed by my immune system as a foreign invader, and it sort of went to kill it. Yeah. It attacked it. Yeah, my body was attacking my husband's DNA when it implanted. And of course that made an awful lot of sense. So he prescribed a couple of different immune suppressant medications, corticosteroids, and it was quite a high dose of prednisolone, I think it was. Yeah. I think it was about 25 milligrams a day. And I remember I had to take it like 6 a.m. or else I wouldn't sleep that night. I mean, it gives you such a kick of adrenaline. In the morning that I used to, although I liked it at first because I thought, this is great, I'm getting so much done. Yeah. I was buzzing around all day, but after a few weeks I did begin to notice. I remember Wes saying to me, I can see a little bit of puffiness here, and I was like, thanks. And I did begin to notice some side effects, and anyone who's been on relatively high dose steroids will say that you do begin to feel a bit puffy around the middle, on the face. There are those side effects, but I persevered. I was seeing that, and I do look back at pictures of me from late 2017, early 2018, and I can see the roundness in my face. So I did that. I also had a nurse come over every few weeks to administer a drip. I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it was
intralipids.
Intralipids, yeah, that was it. Yeah. It was like a mixture of soy and egg yolk, I think. And again, I used to sit watching telly, and she used to come over often on a Friday night and sit in front of the late, and she'd just pop a little needle into my arm, and I'd sit there for a couple of hours, and it was meant to sort of coach your immune cells in a certain way to down-regulate them. And so I did that, and I also took a course of Humira injections. Now, Humira was designed for like inflammatory autoimmune diseases like Crohn's or rheumatoid arthritis. But again, I was prescribed it on the basis that it would suppress my immune system, although I was only allowed 2 injections of it because it's powerful. And I remember getting side effects like headaches and little mouth ulcers. And again, I persevered. So it came to the point where I had to do the half Chicago bloods just to check if the medication had any effect on suppressing my Th1 cells or Th1 cytokines. And it had, but not enough. So this is kind of end of 2017. And I eventually went back. It was kind of early the following year, probably in the new year. I went back to one of the original doctors I'd seen and said, you know, I can't keep taking all of this medication. It's having side effects. I'm feeling puffy and tired, and you know, what will I do? And I remember suggested, well, he said to me, I don't think it's likely at this point that you're going to be able to carry your own baby. You know, maybe something like surrogacy would be a solution, because you've got age on your side. We were still kind of 33, I suppose, at that stage. And you appear to have good egg quality and quantity, nothing wrong with Wes. So I stewed over this then for another few weeks. I remember saying to Wes in early 2018, like, I can't imagine a stranger carrying our baby thousands of miles away. I don't think I could do it. The thought horrifies me. And he said, yeah, but then I said, maybe it's our only chance. So it took an awful lot of mental preparation and thinking through it and reading stories online. And I happen to know a couple of people who've been through surrogacy as well. Took a lot of that to really start the ball rolling in terms of maybe starting to research it. So the first thing we did was to find a lawyer who specializes in international surrogacy law. So we went to meet her in, I think it was around February 2018. I remember it was probably the end of the month, because I remember it was the time of the big snow. Remember the beast from the east? I remember driving into town and there were snowflakes everywhere, and you know, it just, yeah, it sticks out in my head. We spoke to her and she recommended Ukraine as being a successful country for surrogacy for Irish married couples. So she just went through all the legal side, and it was overwhelming, to say the least. I mean, I didn't even know where to begin with what, you know, the information she was giving us. But we went home with a booklet and a list of clinics and agencies to look at. And as anyone who's been through surrogacy in Ukraine will know, it's the agencies and clinics are often partnered together because they work in tandem. So she'd given me a list of ones that her clients had success with and been happy with. So from there, I just Googled the hell out of it. And I Googled a lot of different clinics and agencies, and I spoke to them, and the one we decided to go with, New Life, was the one I was just most impressed with in terms of their response and their English and their, I suppose, the information they gave us. And it just seemed more simple, I suppose, in terms of the information, because it's absolutely overwhelming when you start to research it. And, you know, Ireland doesn't have any sort of structure in place, really, other than what people like me and you are saying about surrogacy and, you know, assisted human reproduction. There isn't that much structure in place for information.
It's very difficult for people, you know, when you're literally shooting in the dark, and all you have to cling on to is what other people are telling you, what you can find on the internet, but there's no, you know, support system in place there. There's no official department that supports people, you know?
And then you're hearing stories or reading stories about people being, you know, swindled out of thousands, and clinics, you know, taking their money and running. And it's really a daunting, challenging process. But, you know, I decided anyway to go with my gut with this clinic. And the next step was them to send over the booklet. So it's about the self cycle for intended parents for surrogacy, and read through it. It's about 12 detailed pages, just all about the surrogacy process if you're using your own eggs. And from there, really it meant, what it became was about 10 months of scans and blood tests and contracts. So we started with the tests and scans, because we, I suppose, needed to be accepted onto the program. And as anyone who's been through Ukrainian surrogacy will know, they're extremely strict in terms of who's allowed onto the program. You have to have sort of a medical condition, or you know, a letter from your doctor, which I had, to say why medically you can't have a child. You know, it could be failed IVF cycles, multiple miscarriages, it could be a structural issue in your uterus. Obviously, anyone who's been through, you know, cancer survivor, anyone who's been through medical issues like that, you know, would be able to apply in that way. So I had to get all sorts of medical letters first. I had a very understanding, supportive GP who I was able to show her the list of blood tests I needed. But I mean, they had to be sort of divided out. So, you know, I'd go 1 week to her clinic and she'd do blood tests for STDs and infectious diseases. But they had actually a 3-month period. So if you didn't get everything back,
you'd have to repeat,
you know, the information back, you have to repeat it. Yeah. So I had to do that, and because of my blood clotting condition, I had to, you know, book to see a consultant in St. James's on genetic hematology, and that took a while. It took a while to get the results back. I had to get sort of all sorts of lung scans, ovary scans, breast scans to show I didn't have breast cancer. I had to get blood tests for cancer markers in my blood. I mean, ultimately, it's to protect you and the surrogate. And that's what I really liked about the clinic and generally the laws in Ukraine, is that they are set up to make sure that all parties are protected legally and medically. And that's actually something that gave me confidence, even though the process took a long time.
Yeah.
So after sort of, what seemed like years of blood tests, and, you know, everything has to be signed by your clinic. You know, you have to get the physical letters rather than emails. I remember I had to drop blood samples into the virology lab at UCD because it was quicker than getting a courier. I had to send a blood sample off to Greece for another test. What it showed me really is that, again, Ireland is not set up. There's no one-stop shop. You know, there's no one place you can go to get all of your tests you need for your surrogacy or fertility journey. You know, to think that I could get some tests in the fertility clinics. Some of them, they just said, no, we can't do that for you. You'll have to go elsewhere. I had to get some in the GP. I had to get a smear test sent up north privately. You know, it was complicated. So when I got to the point anyway that I got everything in, I had to send it by, you know, courier off to Ukraine. And that took a couple of weeks. And eventually it got over there. They sent us the contracts. They had to be looked over by a solicitor here because everything is, it's in English and Ukrainian, but you just want to make sure. I mean, there's pages upon pages of documents. Eventually, everything was signed on the 11th of November, 2018. And from then, the clinic, then it was up to them to, you know, select a surrogate, select a good match for you. And from then, the process was actually quite quick. They have really a database of women who apply to be surrogates. And there are certain criteria. She, you know, they need to have given birth naturally with no complications to their own child. They, you know, there's a certain age bracket, you know, no health complications, and obviously no complications within birth, no history of miscarriages, non-smoker, non-drinker. And when you're matched with your surrogate, you just get, you know, a short kind of 2-page document with all of their information, you know. And it's not all of their information, sorry, it's quite basic, just, you know, name, age, occupation, that kind of thing. Yeah. And you just say yes or no to whether you want them to be your surrogate. So we saw a picture of her, just got a good feeling about it, said yes. And then it took only a few weeks for her to go through all the testing, because obviously they've got the setup there to get all of her tests done to show that she is healthy enough to accept our genetic material.
Yeah.
So then just it involved in early 2019, it was February, 2019, traveling over to Kyiv, where we spent 3 weeks going through the egg retrieval process, egg stimulation, egg retrieval. I actually picked up all the meds I needed in Ireland under the drugs payment scheme. It worked out.
It's a lot cheaper.
Better.
And a lot
cheaper.
of times people going abroad for treatment don't realize that you can get your meds here and bring them with you. Yeah.
Again, I had a very supportive pharmacist who helped me with that. he had a family member who'd been through similar. So yeah, just brought everything over on ice. I mean, I had a little because some of the injections that you need to be kept in the fridge. So I just had a little ice pack on the plane with my little injections. So yeah, I just started the process. It took a week so you start the stimulation process when your period arrives. So my mum came over for the first week, and we actually had a lovely week just sightseeing and doing touristy things in Kyiv. And I must say, it's a fantastic city. I mean, full of culture and history and wonderful people, and a really thriving gastronomic scene as well. We're both veggies, so vegans, and we both found loads of vegan cafes and restaurants, and we just thought it was wonderful. So I'm obviously heartbroken like everyone else is at the moment. But
so you were
that totally distracted me. So anyway, sorry, my period would not arrive. So I went to the clinic after a couple of days. They gave me a progesterone shot to try and stimulate it, and that didn't happen. But funnily enough, Wes was flying over after a week of me being there, and within an hour of him arriving, my period arrived. So it was
just waiting for him to get there.
It was like my body thought, well, no, he needs to be here for this process. This is his process too. He can't, it was bizarre anyway, bizarre timing. I remember I texted my mum, she was on the plane. I texted her and said, it's here. Anyway, I was able to get started. And it was just about 10 days then of the injections. They were really careful to monitor me for ovarian overstimulation syndrome, which can be obviously dangerous. Did that. Everything was fine. I went in after about 10 days and did the egg retrieval procedure under just a light anesthetic. They got 23 eggs. They were really happy with how it went. I made a decent enough recovery. We actually even managed to go for dinner that night just to celebrate.
Wow. Were you not completely out of it?
Once the sort of anesthetic wore off, I was just buzzing to be through it. I mean, it was just, and as anyone who's been through IVF knows, it's just a series of little victories where you think, okay, that's ticked off. I can just relax now. This bit is done. Yeah. So it was like that. I didn't ever want to look too far into the future because I didn't know how the process would end. I didn't know if it would work. So it was just a little series of victories. And then from then we just went home, and the surrogate went in a few weeks later and just did the frozen embryo transfer into her. And then we had the 2-week wait, obviously, for any news, and that was terrifying, but I just had to stay as distracted as possible. I don't think I got a wink of sleep in those 2 weeks, just thinking, is she pregnant, is she not? But I actually had a positive feeling about it. It just seemed like the whole process had gone smoothly. So I had a good feeling. And then 26th of March, 2019, we got the email to say that she was pregnant. Her bloods were looking good. Her first scan would be in a couple of weeks' time. And then from then, really, it was just a series of living from scan to scan. Obviously, it's terrifying for the first 20 weeks, but we got through it. The relief every 2 weeks of the first kind of few scans, you get the 12-week one. And then I think it was 16, and then the 20-week scan, everything was clear. She had her genetic tests done and an anomaly scan and that kind of thing. And then by 26 weeks, I was thinking, I can start buying baby stuff, which I did. The year just flew, really. I just kept as busy as possible. We did a lot of travel because we thought we might not get much done when she arrived. Little did we all know. It got to November and 2019, and the doctor thought that maybe our surrogate would give birth a little bit earlier, as she'd had her own daughter at 38 weeks. So he advised us to fly over at 37 weeks, which happened to be the 11th of the 11th, 2019. So exactly a year to the day that we had signed the contracts.
Wow.
So I thought that was significant. And anyone who's into numerology, I suppose, would say 1111. It certainly followed me around for those few years. So we flew over and had, I suppose, about a week and a half of wandering again around Kyiv, just enjoying it, really, enjoying the city until Sophia was born. And, as I've said before, there's nothing that can prepare you for watching a stranger give birth in a foreign country to your own child. It was just the most exhilarating, kind of terrifying amazing experience. And I remember just being stunned as I walked into the room and saw her on the birthing chair, and Sophia, her head was crowning, and you know, our surrogate was just in deep concentration, and my mum sort of gave me a gentle nudge. I was like, I don't know what to do.
She's like, get in there.
Yeah. And I remember the doctor, as we'd agreed, I would cut the umbilical cord, which is significant because it's handing, you know, so again, I've talked about this so many times, so it's still the moment that it tears me up. But, you know, it's the moment that you're being handed your child out of your surrogate's care into your care, and then they become yours, you know, and, you know, they're in your arms. Sorry. It just comes out of nowhere. But, you know, you've obviously been through this whole experience. But I remember he handed me the scissors, or whatever the medical version of the scissors is, and I was like, do you have a left-handed pair? I'm left-handed. And he just looked at me like, okay. And I just felt so ridiculous in that moment. I just didn't know what to say. And you know, when you're just overcome with kind of the emotion of it all. And Sophia was then she actually wasn't handed to us. She was obviously given to the midwife, who they cleaned her and weighed her. But I remember just like going over to our surrogate and just going, thank you, thank you, thank you, bawling, crying. I mean, she must have just thought, who are you? What are you doing? I mean, we had met her the previous week at her final scan. But I mean, the woman was obviously just exhausted after giving birth. She was a hero. And I'll never be able to, you know, thank her enough for what she's done. And obviously, as I've spoken about recently, she's caught up in the situation in Ukraine. She's in a city called Kherson, or Kherson, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, down in the south of the country. It's occupied at the moment. And I contacted her at the very beginning of the war, and said to her, you know, we want you to come and live with us, with her little girl. Obviously we would do absolutely anything for her, because she's given us our daughter. And we've tried everything to get her out. I've looked at humanitarian organizations busing people out. You know, I've tried kind of every angle, but she's just said that the Russians are controlling who comes in and who leaves, and she's seen people being shot at trying to leave. So she just doesn't feel like there's any way she can get her little girl, who's 5, I think, out of there safely. So she's just going to shelter for now. But hopefully, I'm staying positive that we can, you know, do that for her after what she's done for us. So you know, that was our experience kind of in Ukraine. We were able to bring Sophia home after a couple of weeks, and to get home in time for Christmas.
What was it like introducing her to your family?
Well, my mom was there with us in Kyiv when she was born, but my dad came to meet us at the airport when we landed, and it was lovely. You know how lovely Dublin Airport is at Christmas,
for Christmas,
and just the decorations and the music, and it's just such an amazing feeling to, you know, to land in your own country with your, you know, new baby. And my dad was there. Sorry, I don't know where this is all coming from. Maybe
you're gonna set me up.
Maybe I just need a good cry. Maybe but my dad was there, and I just have the most gorgeous pictures and videos of him just cuddling her. Obviously, his first grandchild as well. And then we drove home, and Wes's family had decorated our house with like flowers and welcome home balloons, and you know, just everything was set out for our new arrival. And Sophia, actually, she was great. She actually slept for the whole flight, apart from once she woke up and I changed her and she had a bottle. But she was you know, she was kind of fine. Sorry, 2 flights, should I say. So she slept for most of them. Anyway, on the way home. And she got home, and Wes actually showed me the video recently. We just did a little tour. She was fast asleep, but we brought her around to her house and showed her. It was so sweet, but we showed her bedroom or her nursery, and, you know, the cot by our bed where she'd be, and gave her a little tour of her home. So you know, that was our first night with her, and you know, it was just lovely to have our first Christmas with our new baby. And life sort of continued in this lovely, tired, exhausted baby bubble until, as we all know, we went into lockdown in March 2020. But the funny thing is now, and I feel a bit silly even, looking back on it now, but it was my first time obviously experiencing that level of sleep deprivation with a newborn, and Sophia would party all night long and I was exhausted. So around February 2020, I remember just thinking, God, I'm so tired all the time, and I feel nauseous, and I was getting these sort of waves of nausea. I remember one evening Wes coming home with an Indian takeaway and saying, do you want some? And we just going, the smell, no, I had to leave the room. And I thought, God, the sleep deprivation business is bad, you know, and I probably wasn't eating properly. I was, you know, you just grab snacks on the go and takeaways and all that kind of thing when you have a new baby. So I thought, God, I really have to start looking after myself a bit more, and, you know, just hopefully we'll get some sleep. So I was on the Late Late Show at the end of February 2020 talking about how I couldn't have a baby, and, you know, we had gone through the surrogacy process and had Sophia. And the very next day I got what I thought was my period. Now, I'd missed 2 months, 2 cycles. I hadn't got it in 2 months. And again, and it seems so naive because obviously I know now, but obviously I just thought, God, you know, I'm so sleep deprived that my body is all over the place.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, my period's here. It was just a bit of light spotting. That went on for a few days, kind of strange. But so it would have started on the Saturday. So on the Tuesday, I was changing Sophia in the evening. I just suddenly got this sharp, intense, like horrible cramping. And I had to get Wes to finish changing her. I had to get a hot water bottle, sit down, and it was getting worse and worse. And I stood up, and look, I know your listeners are probably well used to
it. Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, thankfully the conversation about female bodies has evolved enough that we can talk about this stuff. But there was an awful big gush of blood all over the floor, and clots, big clots, like the size of my fist, or the size of the palm of my hand. And I thought, gosh, this is a heavy period. Obviously just to build up. And so I ran to the bathroom. Wes was just looking quite shaken, and just sat on the loo for a bit, and just there was a lot of blood coming out, and tissue and clots and all the rest. And Wes was coming into me saying, I'm going to call your mum because this is not normal. And I said, no, it's just a heavy period, I'll be fine. And it got to it was about 8:30 or 9 at the stage at night, and I was like, again, lying in a ball of pain with a lot of blood around me, and saying, I'm okay. And he called my mum. My mum rushes over and says, you're not okay, get your coat on, or I'll get your coat for you, we're going straight to hospital. So she drove me into Holles Street. I was sent, I mean, they're fantastic there. They just look after you so quickly. I was brought into the emergency department, and they took a urine sample first, and then some tissue samples, and obviously checked my vitals, I mean, blood pressure and that kind of thing, and I was okay. And they came back a little while later and said, well, our lab has confirmed pregnancy tissue, and our urine test has confirmed that you had a pregnancy. And, you know, they were saying, I'm so sorry. When was your last period? 19th of December. I remember that. So I would have been coming up to 11 weeks pregnant. And rather than being, I mean, I was obviously shocked because I'd never got to that stage. I mean, my body had never gone on more than a month after that 6.5 week mark. But I remember saying to the nurse, this is amazing. You know, I can't believe I've never got this far in a pregnancy. And she was a bit taken aback.
She was like, why are you happy?
Yeah, I was like, this is incredible, Mum. My mum was there holding my hand. I was like, Mum, can you believe this? What's happened? And, you know, she kind of gently, you know, rubbed my arm and said, you know, we have a support service if you'd like to avail of that. And I said, I'll be fine. I have a little 3-month-old baby to come home to.
And she was probably, she was probably like, what is this woman on?
Yeah. And I remember separately, she and another doctor said to me, you know, I'll be quite fertile after a pregnancy at this stage, and whatever goes on maybe hormonally in your body. So just be a little bit careful if you want to avoid a pregnancy again quickly. You know, you might need time to heal and to recover. I remember, you know, hearing that and thinking, maybe I won't be careful. Maybe this is something, there's something here, something has changed, and we weren't in lockdown at that stage, but obviously my life had slowed down with a newborn. I wasn't traveling, and I used to travel a lot for work. I used to have a very fast-paced kind of busy life, and I had slowed down. And I thought maybe there is something here. So I kind of stopped. I mean, you lose track anyway of your cycle and what's going on anyway after a miscarriage, and it all goes a little bit haywire. So I had no idea where I was anyway. And it's not like we were trying actively to have a baby. But we went into lockdown, I remember. And this is kind of towards the end of, so we went into lockdown in mid-March. Just slowed down. The whole pace of life slowed down. It was actually quite nice to just have no pressure. Obviously, the horrors of the outside world in China and northern Italy were extremely, awful to watch. But in terms of just, I think we all just slowed down to routine at home. And I remember it got to kind of mid-April, and I was again just feeling really lightheaded and tired. And I recognized this feeling now, obviously, from before. And I thought, oh, not again. I don't want to have to go back to Hollis Street and have another miscarriage, and, so soon after the last one. And I suppose my first feeling was just kind of, not this again. So I did a pregnancy test. I remember it so well. It was the 19th of April, 2020. It was my birthday weekend. And I remember I'd just been feeling really emotional and really, I was about to say like I am today, crying and everything, but I'm not pregnant.
I was about to say.
And I took the test and I walked down and showed it to Wes, and we both just looked at each other and kind of went, oh. It wasn't a positive, happy excitement at all. It was a feeling of kind of dread, thinking, okay, we're in lockdown, we have no family support, and we're going to have to go through this again. And I figured that I was probably about 6.5 weeks. It turned out I was earlier, but and that's the thing, sorry, just to say about miscarriage. The first time you get pregnant, I think there's a sense of innocence and excitement about it, and that is torn from you. It's stolen when you have a pregnancy loss. I don't think it's ever the same anyway, in my experience anyway. It's never the same again. You don't have the same sort of innocence and excitement about it all. So I ended up contacting anyway one of the consultants I'd seen previously in Hollis Street, and he said, look, come in to me for a scan, because I just said to him, I was in here last month, 5 weeks ago, having miscarriage. Went in, got scanned, and he found a sac, an empty sac. And he said, if you are 6.5 weeks or so, we really should be seeing the signs of a growing baby and possibly a heartbeat. But your dates may be wrong. So maybe come back next week. But I remember thinking, oh, my dates probably aren't wrong. It's probably just what they call an embryonic pregnancy. And, I was sort of thinking, okay, we'll probably lose it over the weekend and I'll have to go in next week and, say that to him. Anyway, my pregnancy symptoms kind of increased a little bit over the weekend. I remember feeling more tired and a little bit queasy. And I went back to him the following week, and he did a scan again, and he detected a heartbeat. And I have it all on film, because obviously Wes couldn't come in because of COVID restrictions. He couldn't come in to the clinic with me. So, it's lovely to have it all, but it was me going, holy shit, a heartbeat.
Because you'd never seen that before.
No, I'd never got to a point of seeing a heartbeat. So it was incredibly exciting. I mean, I remember saying to the consultant, what is that? And he goes, that is an embryo with a beating heart, or fetus, or whatever he said, with a beating heart. And I just thought, wow. So at that stage, I rang my mom and told her, I actually sent her the video first and said, this just happened. And she was like, what? What is this? Who is this?
What am I looking at?
And rang Wes, and again, my mom was excited, but we were all very cautious. I mean, there was no sense of this will actually happen. I was just like, oh, this is cool, but I'll still get on with my day. So the consultant asked me to go back the following week. He just wanted to keep a really close eye on me at this stage. So went back the following week, 3rd week in a row, and he did another scan. And this time he sort of, put the gel and the transducer over my tummy, and he said, just hold on a sec. And I said, okay, what did you see? Is there more than one? Because I'd seen something as well on the screen. And he actually did a transvaginal scan as well to double check. But he said, it's twins. And again, 3rd week in a row, me filming, going, oh my God, Oh my God, I thought I was going to faint. And there, very clearly on the screen, we could see 2 sacs and 2 heartbeats.
Wow.
And, you know, the little curled up shape. And so he called a nurse in, she confirmed it as well. And they were able to say at that stage that they were identical twins sharing a placenta.
Wow.
So he told me that obviously my fertilized egg had split at a certain point. Earlier in the process, you know, the few day kind of window, if it had split, they would have had separate placentas, and then a bit later on, they may have been conjoined twins. But it's just at this stage when they split, they shared a placenta. So it just put me in the category of kind of higher risk. I mean, twins anyway are considered a high risk pregnancy, but it just meant that I needed to be more closely monitored. There are conditions called twin-to-twin transfusion.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, placental issues that can arise. So I was just sort of closely monitored then. I was in every week for a while for scans. Everything looked really positive. I mean, I remember 7 weeks, my consultant saying that, you know, you could tell, you know, your in-laws if you want, because, you know, he just said a strong heartbeat at 7 weeks, the sign. But I didn't, I mean, I had all these feelings then to sort of deal with, where, you know, I'd only just a couple of months before gone on national TV and said I couldn't have a baby and I needed medical help. And now, you know, I'd been very comfortable being a public person, talking about fertility and surrogacy, and maybe being an advocate for surrogacy and saying, you know, well, this is a great means to a family, for couples who can't have a baby by themselves. And now suddenly I had to deal with the idea that actually I was pregnant with 2 babies, not 1.
Yeah.
And having been told that I couldn't carry any. So I had a lot of feelings to sort of deal with. It's like reversing all you thought you knew about yourself, and I had made peace. I'd been very comfortable being the girl who couldn't have a baby without medical help. And I'd been very open about saying that. And even strangers would say to me, say at events or weddings, oh, do you have any kids? And I'd say, well, no, we need a surrogate, we need help. And, you know, I was fine with that. So yeah, it was strange, like reversing all you think you know about yourself. So I kind of went through that. It took me a long time. I mean, we did have a scare actually at around 11 weeks. I had a bleed, quite a sudden heavy bleed at home, and had to rush into hospital, get checked. But again, the twins were fine. It was just to do with, I think, growth, and a little blood vessel had burst. And I mean, I have to say it was a very smooth, I mean, twin pregnancy itself isn't easy. You do get very sort of heavy and tired. I remember,
okay, let's just remember for a second that you also have a brand new baby.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah,
so you're not just pregnant with twins, but you also have a brand new baby.
And
are in lockdown.
I mean, luckily my husband was home as well. Yeah. And, you know, I remember Sophia was 4 months, okay, when I found out I was pregnant with twins. So she was on 2 naps a day. So I used to just go nap with her in the afternoon. I couldn't get through the day without naps. I had really debilitating nausea, as plenty of women do for the first trimester. But I didn't get sick, but it was just all day nausea, which, you know, isn't pleasant, especially when you're living with someone who wants to cook scallops.
Oh,
I remember one day having to say, I had to just leave the house and get some fresh air.
Now that would be grounds for divorce.
Oh yeah. It was the first and last time he'd done it. I don't know what he was thinking.
But at what point did you really believe that it was happening? Because surely, you know, throughout the pregnancy, it just must have been so surreal to have gone through all of this and then suddenly, like, not just be pregnant with 1 baby, but with 2.
It was, and it was surreal for so many ways. Obviously, the situation we were in terms of just Ireland being in lockdown, it meant that I wasn't obviously seeing friends. My family knew, but I kind of hadn't told anyone else, apart from a couple of good friends. And it was a bizarre feeling, but it was nice to have a little secret as well. And I was looking back a while ago at my Instagram pictures from then, and I just had props. I had like Sophia or the dog, or, you know,
a pillow.
You do show quite quickly with the twin pregnancy. I mean, it's hard to hide the bump. I was actually big enough by 12 weeks. But yeah, the time seemed to go quickly. And by the time I announced it, I was halfway through. And each scan, I mean, was very positive. Their growth trajectory was very positive. No signs of any issues that I mentioned earlier with twins. It just kind of progressed. Obviously, looking after Sophia got more difficult. We did have to get help with her then after a while, and I just had to rest an awful lot, because I found actually the more I rested, the more the boys sort of grew well, I suppose, from scan to scan. So I found it hard to walk around too much after a while, but their growth was very good. The consultants and doctors, the twin team in Hollis Street were very happy with how their growth and development was going. So it got to, it was my final scan actually. So really from the beginning, I should say, I was strongly advised to opt for a cesarean. And it would have been on the 23rd of November at 36 weeks. So I went in the week before for my final scan, and they discovered what's called placental insufficiency. So it just meant that, they found that Hugo had grown only a couple of ounces in the past fortnight, whereas Oscar had grown a pound or something. And, towards the end, they do put on that bit of body fat. So I was told to go home. They were concerned, but obviously tried not to show too much concern. But I was told anyway to go home, grab my hospital bag, which was already packed, say goodbye to Sophia, and check into hospital that afternoon, because they'd be delivered the very next morning at 35 weeks. So just went home, said my goodbyes to Sophia, went back into hospital, and they just monitored the boys' heartbeats closely. Luckily, Hugo, he was fine, but it was caught. I suppose it hadn't been going on that long, but I think they were grateful that it was caught when it was. And they were, delivered the very next morning. And it was funny, because I think when you have a due date in your head, you think, okay, I'll get all the stuff done, and I'd like work stuff to still get done and all sorts of things to do. And I remember in hospital that night with my laptop just sending emails and going, and looking back on it, but it was Sophia's first birthday say I would have had it was Sophia's first birthday on the 21st of November, and I was due to go into hospital on the 23rd. So I booked a birthday cake for her and balloons and organized a little birthday celebration for her. And obviously I had to cancel them and, send emails to people saying, I'm just in hospital, I'll be having my twins tomorrow, so I can't do this thing or that or whatever. Anyway, what are we like, us women?
I know, like trying to tie up all the loose ends, and it's like, actually, no, none of it matters.
Yeah,
none of it matters.
Relax.
Yeah.
You're giving birth to two humans tomorrow.
Yeah.
So the babies were born the next morning, and I suppose it's just. It was a really positive, exciting, happy experience, and probably more smooth. In terms of the pregnancy and the birth, it was more smooth and less anxious for me than Sophia's pregnancy and birth. Again, because of the lack of control. I think, we handed control of everything over to our surrogate and then the medical team over there. And obviously they were fantastic and everything went well. But I think when you're the one carrying the babies, you have more control over what you're doing, what you're eating, where you're going, all that kind of thing. And, they were born by C-section. Wes was there. He loved all the gore and the blood. I think he was filming it going, he was like, they've made the first incision and wow. And, what you want to hear, I think, as the woman giving birth is your baby's cry.
Yeah.
I was just desperate to hear them cry and just know that they were okay. And Hugo was born first, and he was crying, and Wes said, he's perfect, he's absolutely perfect. And he was handed to me, and had a bit of skin on skin. And then Oscar, in the time that obviously couldn't feel anything, but in the time that Hugo came out, and like the short 3 minutes between them both coming out, Oscar did a huge roll in all the space. He obviously said,
he's like,
oh, I have so much
party.
Yeah, I could do a huge roll. So the consultant was laughing. He was like, he had to be taken out in a different way than was expected. And it all went well. I won't say it's easy to make a recovery after a cesarean or childbirth in general. There's a lot of elements involved, and but you get through it. And my mantra was always, this is tough, but I'm tougher. And you heal, and there's an awful lot of support there as well. I mean, I breastfed as well I lasted about 6 weeks through mainly expressing. The boys were in the NICU for the first week, but we were able to bring them home then. And I used to go in and deliver colostrum, obviously, at first, every 3 hours, and then breast milk. And I hired one of these medical grades or hospital grades breast pumps as well, which I had.
I will never get that sound out of my head. That sound of the breast pump.
The feeling of it. But thinking back, like in the week where I was discharged, maybe a couple of days before the boys were, so I went home to my 1-year-old Sophia, and I used to sit there feeding her porridge in the morning with my double breast pumps on, under my dressing gown, as if it was perfectly normal. And then I'd put, I'd decant them into little bottles and put them on ice and drive into Holles Street and drop them into the boys in NICU and feed them. Or I did do a bit of breastfeeding as well, but the boys were so little as well that it was more, I suppose, straightforward to keep an eye on the volume they were having. And then they had they latched on okay, but I think it was easier for them to take the teat. And so we just continued that at home. And then after about a month and a half, supply wasn't meeting demand. And I think I was just worn out as well. I mean, I was still trying to look after, Sophia, who felt and looked huge compared to the twins. But now I look back, she was only 1. I mean, they're so little tiny, at 1. Yeah. They're tiny. But I was trying to, give her her 3 meals a day and snacks. And, we did have plenty of help and support, which was the only way we survived it. My mum used to turn up every day with food for me. But you do get worn out with newborn twins and a 1-year-old. But you get through it. And we were still in lockdown at that stage, and nobody was obviously going anywhere. We did end up getting a night nurse. I remember the first night we brought them home, and we followed advice from Holles Street to keep them in the one cot downstairs during the day so they could be side by side, but we could supervise them in case they overheated or anything like that. But just to keep them in separate cots on either side of our bed at night, so we could just one each basically. So there was no chance of one parent getting more sleep than the other.
We're in this together.
Yeah, totally. But we did that, and you're buzzing with adrenaline bringing your newborns home for the first time. And I remember the first night we got 20 minutes sleep because the boys just didn't settle at the same time. And the next night we got 30 minutes sleep. And I remember my dad coming over and just being like, you guys are grey with exhaustion. You need to do something about this. So I was able to contact a friend who was able to recommend a night nurse who was able to come over and help just every second night, actually. But it made such a difference knowing that every second night we'd get a full night's sleep.
I think even knowing that you're going to get a sleep the next night gets you through the bad night. If you know that you have a sleep coming.
Like, obviously on the bad nights when we had the twins, we probably managed an hour or two at the most, but at least we'd get up in the morning and say, we sleep tonight. And this is still with a 12-month-old, to look after. But Sophia was fine, actually. She was great. She kind of just went down and slept. But you plow through and you get on with it. And we just couldn't believe that within the space of a year, we went from 0 to 3 babies after all we'd been through.
What do you think happened? Is there any explanation? Have you ever been given an explanation of how you had gone through so many losses and then this happened?
No, I mean, I think it's the mystery of human reproduction and the human body. And certainly I did ask my consultant at the time when I was pregnant, how he thought it could have happened. There's no medical explanation that can be given. It's too hard to quantify and measure anyway. But he did give anecdotal evidence of couples he'd seen going through IVF or about to start IVF and getting pregnant, or going through surrogacy as we did and getting pregnant naturally. I think it was a series of unique events, really, which started from our surrogate sent me a text message on January 1st, 2020, just to say Happy New Year, and that she wanted to give us a sibling for Sophia. So I remember just thinking, well, we had such a positive experience. She's such a wonderful person. And we still have embryos over in Kyiv in the clinic. So really, from when she's allowed to try to get pregnant again, I think she had to wait 8 months to be medically cleared. But I just thought, okay, we'll start again in July. So start the process again. We won't even have to travel over there. I won't have to go through the whole procedure. We'll just start again, and hopefully she'll be able to give Sophia a sibling. And I secretly wished for twins.
So you put that out there into the universe. I did. And that's what the universe brought back.
Yeah, so I switched off. At this point we'd switched off even trying ourselves. But there's a certain part of your brain, I think, that doesn't stop trying either, Yeah. So that happened, and then the miscarriage happened as well, which apparently increased my fertility. And then we went into lockdown, which I think just calmed me. I think I just live on adrenaline and stress, and I seem to thrive under pressure like so many people do nowadays. And I just, maybe my body was able to recalibrate and heal whatever issue had been there. And looking back, I think maybe any immune related issues were actually triggered by stress. But at the time, my mom and Wes would say, maybe slow down a bit, stop taking on everything. And, but I think, ironically, I made myself busier than ever because we weren't having a family, because I couldn't have a baby. I wanted to take my mind off it and squeeze in as much as I possibly could to avoid awkward questions about when I would settle down and have kids. So it was a catch-22 situation, and it's amazing how your psychology works. It's only when you look back that you realize why you act as you do. So I think those factors combined together, just the enforced rest at home. And Sophia, she ended up becoming a good enough sleeper that we were getting rest. We were able to kind of relax and just make the most of our time in lockdown. And looking back, it does feel like a simpler time when we didn't know how long it would all go on for. And, I remember the weather being good and having barbecues outside and just enjoying the garden.
I know.
So I think those things.
It was nice going back to normal, or more normal, but it also, I think everyone kind of looks back on that period of time with kind of some nostalgia, because it was kind of nice just having your own little unit. And I know not everyone was lucky enough to, have a good home environment, but for those who did, it was a nice time, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people went through awful trauma and illness, and businesses closing and that kind of thing. But yeah, as you say, for those of us lucky enough to just have a home to enjoy and, a supportive environment, it was a simpler time, I suppose. Yes. And there was a real sort of community feel, we're all in this together kind of
like the 90s, but with internet.
Yes. I was sorry to say it was like the 90s, but we could all share our memes.
Yeah, for sure. I could talk to you all day. Your story is absolutely incredible. Like, just the trauma that you've been through, but then what you have today is just, I'm sure you pinch yourself sometimes.
I do. I can actually hear that the twins have woken up from their nap, but they're fine. They're downstairs being looked after. But I really, it's easy to go day to day and just get caught up in the busyness of everyday life with the family, and kind of forget how far you've come. But it's so important, and it's important to do these podcasts and conversations and to talk about your experiences and share our stories, because I suppose it's a nice reminder of how far you know, you've come yourself, but also to, I think it's so important to share these stories to be able to support others. And, you know, again, that's why I wrote my book, is to be able to share in much more detail than I've just shared now. And it's hard to even be succinct about the story because there's so many elements to it. I mean, 3 major parts to it. I haven't even gone into what life is like with three babies, but we won't even go there. I think anyone with small children knows what it's like. But you know, they're fantastic, and it's just, we're so happy, and you know, it's gorgeous just to see them run around together. And that's what we wanted, really, was just to have 3 children who were wanted once we found out we were expecting the twins, not from the very beginning. But you know, just what we wanted was just 3 children close in age who were able just to have fun together and just enjoy each other's company. That's not to say there aren't fights from time to time, but I think that's normal with children. But generally they're great friends, and it's just, you know, life is obviously different now. I don't even get to leave the house on my own that much anymore. But thanks to the wonders of technology, we're able to communicate and work from home as well, which is great. But you know, it is such a precious time, and I'm just lapping it all up. I'm just trying to really enjoy it as much as possible, because these baby years, as everyone says, go so quickly. Sophia starts preschool this year, then the boys next
crazy,
year.
Isn't it? It's so crazy how quick it goes.
I'm going to miss having them at home. But so it's a lovely time.
A couple of final questions. One, what would you say to anyone who is, you know, I'm sure you get a lot of people messaging you who are going through similar struggles, and what is usually your advice? Like, what was the most helpful thing that was said to you during the time when you were going through the recurrent miscarriage and pregnancy loss?
You know, it's a tough one, because it's very hard to believe that it will actually happen. You know, I found it hard to believe that it would happen, although I did stay positive. I did visualize. I used to go into our spare room and say, this is our baby's nursery. You know, this is our child's room, and you know, this is what it will be one day. So I did a lot of that sort of visualization stuff, and really stayed positive. I think, you know, it's very hard to say to a couple or an individual going through a fertility struggle or pregnancy loss that everything will be okay. You can't wave a magic wand and fix the trauma they're going through. But the best thing I can advise is just to get all the support you can, have that 1 or 2 people to speak in close confidence with. Don't bottle things up. Don't go through it alone. Even your partner who you're going through it with, you know, you need someone else outside of that little bubble you're in, I think, because your partner's struggling. You know, you're going to have to both support each other as a couple, but also as individuals. And everyone has a different way of dealing with things. You know, Wes was very strong for a long time, and he picked me up and comforted me. But I remember one particular night he was out with some friends, and 2 of his friends had recently, their wives had given birth, and they were obviously just talking about fatherhood and the highs and lows of it all, and they'd had a few drinks, and Wes came home and just burst into tears out of nowhere. And he's not one to cry out of nowhere, but he just said, it's so hard that we can't have a baby. My friends were talking about their babies, and I just felt so sad that we're going through this. And, you know, he had obviously bottled it up for so long that it all just came spilling out. So, you know, after that, really, I encouraged him to talk about it. And men perhaps need a little, traditionally anyway, need a little bit, maybe more encouragement with talking about how they're feeling about a situation. So, you know, that is a top piece of advice. I suppose another piece of advice is to just ask all the questions. You know, when you do visit a doctor or an expert in reproductive medicine or anything like that, just to ask as many questions as you can. I found that and not everyone is in a position to do their own research or knows what to look for or ask about, but I found that I kind of had to take control of what I wanted to know, and I wasn't afraid to ask for different tests if I thought they might help to find out more, piece together the puzzle. So, you know, sometimes doctors are used to saying the same thing to different patients, or may think that you don't understand what they're saying and have to really simplify it. But I did do a lot of reading, and I suppose I looked at a lot of these support groups and support pages as well online, and just read other people's stories. And again, I remember thinking if I ever get a chance to share our story, it might help someone else out there. And I was desperate for a story of hope. I always clung on to the stories of hope that I could find. Actually, one I've mentioned before is a couple we met on a family holiday, I mean, years ago now, but they had their son with them. And they told us that they had tried to conceive for 15 years. I mean, all but given up. And then out of nowhere, their son came along. Wow. So I remember thinking, if that can happen to, that was one of the stories I kind of clung on to. If that can happen to them, it can happen to me. So, or us. And, you do just find these little stories here and there and just hold on to them.
Well, isn't it such a full circle event that you've been able to write a book about this now and then pass on those stories of hope to the next generations of people going through this?
Yes, I mean, the reason I have it here, but the reason Sophia there, and I remember for the photo shoot having to put my feet up for the rest of the day because I think I was wearing heels and holding Sophia. But it's lovely that my 3 babies are there in the photo, and twin bump is no laughing matter. But yeah, I mean, I wrote the book obviously for anyone who's been through a fertility struggle, through pregnancy loss, and everyone has such different experiences, even whether it's something like stillbirth or surrogacy or IVF. What I found from talking to so many people over the last few years is that our emotions tend to be similar. That feeling of loss and trauma and frustration and loneliness, and the feeling that there isn't enough conversation out there about what we're all going through. And that's really been a big reason why I've talked about it so publicly and written a book about it and talked about it where and when I can, because if my experiences can contribute to the conversation somewhere and to make others feel less alone and less isolated, then that's so important. And there has been a big change I found in how we're speaking about fertility and pregnancy loss in the last few years. Women are and men are coming out and being so much more open about it, and that's through the efforts of you as well, and everyone out there talking about how they got their families. There are, as we know, many different ways that we can have our families nowadays, and hopefully that will be recognized by everyone soon. But yeah, so, and obviously I wrote the book then for my children, for Sophia, Hugo and Oscar to read in the future. Because as we all know, the years pass by quickly, details fade. I wanted to, as challenging as it was to write a book with newborns and a toddler last year, it had to be done last year when the memories were fresh and when I could dig deep and get all the information out there. And, I want them to be able to read it in the future and know how exactly they came into the world and how wanted they are and how loved they are. And particularly for Sophia to realize that, I still hold on to guilt that I couldn't give birth to her. And it may sound kind of silly even, but, I don't view her obviously as any different. She's still my biological daughter, but I do feel guilty that I couldn't hold her and feel her kicks. And I would have loved that so much. But, that was one of the highlights of being pregnant with the boys, was just the elbows and the knees, and it can be painful, but it's incredible, real physical, it's real life, and it's magical. So I want her to know that she's no different to her brothers in any way, and to her to always feel equal. So in the future they might read it, or they might just think I'm really embarrassing. But
probably both. I would say.
But maybe at some stage.
Final question: what is your favorite thing about being mummy to these 3 beautiful children?
I think it's the bond we have. I just love waking up in the morning and seeing them, and the cuddles we have, and the feeling that I'm their mom and their protector, and that they come to me with everything. I mean, usually for snack demands, to be honest, but the love that they have for me and I have for them, and as a family, we're just a family unit, and we can laugh together, and we do a lot of dancing at home. The boys love music, and I particularly like David Guetta kind of trance stuff, bizarrely, because I certainly didn't listen to it during my pregnancy, but Wes puts on sort of real dancey music, and the boys go like this dancing. It's hilarious to watch. But yeah, I think it's just that bond that you have with your children is just special, and a feeling that we're family and that we're here for each other forever.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. Honestly, I could talk to you for hours more, just about all of it, all of the struggles,
I know.
Parenthood, kids, relationships.
I know, I could too, and it's so sort of healing as well, I think, to talk about it. And each time I do go into detail, and I'm sure you're the same, you've got an amazing story, but I think every time you do talk about it, you unearth past feelings, or feelings you've buried, or traumas you've buried, and it is healing to talk, even if you've told the story before.
I think when you have such a story like this, every time you tell it, you find something a little bit different. And I don't think that's ever going to change. You'll always discover new things. Yeah,
absolutely. And even something I haven't really touched on that much is how it affects a marriage or a relationship, and that kind of thing. But
that's a whole nother podcast.
another day. I've probably talked enough at this stage. I think I'm emotionally spent. Actually.
That was like a therapy session.
Yeah, that was. Yeah.
But thank you so much again. I'll let you get back to your babies, and
I know what chaos unfolds. I'm sure they're having lunch, and I don't think we can get through a meal without food being flung everywhere. So
that's all part of the fun.
All normal.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. At least we have a dog who has developed a pot belly, I think, from all of the snacks.
Thank you so much, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you. You too. Thanks.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Fertility Talks, the Therapie Fertility podcast. If you have, please rate, review, and subscribe. For more information on Therapie Fertility and the services we provide, please visit our website at www.therapiefertility.com.